Hi, I'm going to use this short video to give you a brief introduction to the forms and systems of government. As you should be aware at this point, the world is a very complex place, and so as a result of that and the diversity that exists throughout the world, this is a complex topic, and so I'm going to try to go through it briefly to give you an introduction, but at the same time to give you enough information to have at least an elementary understanding of some important terms and structures. So the first form of government that we're going to discuss is called the autocracy. Autocracy literally means rule by one. And there are a couple different types of autocracies that we're going to discuss. The first of which is the totalitarian dictatorship. A totalitarian dictatorship is distinguished as such because the ruler has absolute, total control over what happens inside his country. And I say his because totalitarian dictators have only ever been men. He is typically responsible for pretty arbitrary decision making. He needs the support of a strong military and a very intricate and strong secret police, state security system. Neighbors have to be willing to spy on other neighbors. A great example of a modern totalitarian dictatorship is North Korea, and here you see pictured in this meme Kim Jong-un, the current leader of North Korea, the totalitarian dictator. Another type of autocracy that I'm going to discuss today is the authoritarian dictatorship. And an authoritarian dictatorship is different from a totalitarian dictatorship because the authoritarian dictator does not demand absolute and total control over everything that happens. A good metaphor is that the totalitarian dictator is like a parent with a quick temper and very strict rules. Because the authoritarian dictator demands that you obey the laws and demands absolute loyalty. Unquestioning loyalty. Relying on a lot of the same tactics as the totalitarian dictator, the secret police, the military, the prisons, that sort of censorship. But in addition to that, the authoritarian dictator relies heavily on patronage, the idea of giving jobs to people who benefit you. People who are especially loyal to the regime will get higher ranking positions in the government, more money, they'll get other benefits that regular citizens don't get. And in return, the dictator asks for complete loyalty. Bashar al-Assad is the authoritarian dictator of Syria right now, and he is pictured here. And this is a demonstration, actually a pro-Assad demonstration. Syria is involved in a great civil war right now as citizens look for greater freedoms under the authoritarian dictator. So the last autocracy that I'm going to talk about today is the absolute monarchy. And the absolute monarchy is where things can get a little tricky because really, in many ways, the absolute monarchy is a dictatorship. It is just the manner in which you are chosen for the position that distinguishes it as a monarchy. It's based off of dynastic succession. So you're talking about a family passing it down from generation to generation, that heredity piece. This right here is King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia. He is one of the last absolute monarchs in the entire world because it is very rare for there to be an absolute monarch. Saudi Arabia and Swaziland are two examples of places that are currently still absolute monarchies. When the government is composed of a small group of people, this is called an oligarchy. And oligarchies are also very, very rare in the world today. And they used to be actually very common in Central and South America, and that's why the most commonly known form of oligarchy is the junta. And a junta is when you have a group of generals that rule the country. So specifically, military, generals that come together and rule. That's called a junta. And it was very common in Latin America, but now it's actually prohibited by Central and South American countries through the bylaws of the Organization of American States. So this video is kind of increasing as we go through the forms of government in the number of people that are involved in the decision making, culminating in everyone. And this is a democracy, and when the people rule. There are two types of democracies: a direct democracy, and in a direct democracy, the citizens vote for everything. Everything is decided by the people. It really is the people voting. We use Athens in ancient Greece as the example of a direct democracy. We have to use ancient Greece because this type of government does not exist in the modern world. It can't, because we have to have jobs and we have to be productive, and we can't just make laws and do the governing. So instead, we elect representatives, and we have a representative democracy. This is where some confusion can come in, because very rarely do people call it a representative democracy. More often they use the synonym for representative democracy, which is republican. So a republican form of government is when the population votes to elect representatives, and those representatives then do the process of governing. The same thing, representative democracy and the term republican mean the same thing. When a country is described as having a republican form of government, that means it's a representative democracy. This usage of the word republican is unrelated to the American political party, and that's where some people get a little confused, because they think that they're somehow connected or related, and they are not. A theocracy is the last form of government that I'm going to talk about, because it's a bit unusual in relationship to the others, in that the others function unto themselves, whereas a theocracy is also one of the others. Theocracy can be a autocracy, an oligarchy, or a democracy. The thing that makes it different is that the laws of the state religion are then the laws of the state. The Islamic Republic of Iran has a republican government, but supreme to the elected leaders is the Shia religious leader known as the Ayatollah, who I have pictured here. His name is Ali Khamenei. So what happens when there actually is nobody in charge? And this is when you don't have government at all, the absence of government, also known as anarchy. And what is very similar to what Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau called the state of nature. Anarchy is this state. There is no government services, and it's, the everyman for himself. Now that I've talked about the forms of government, I'm going to focus on the structures that facilitate the operations in those governments. So it's not anymore a discussion about who has the power. We're moving into an idea about where is that power within the country. How is it broken up? How is it shared? A parliamentary government is definitely a republican form of government, because people elect representatives that then do the governing. Those representatives also choose the head of the government, the chief executive. That person is usually either called prime minister or called chancellor. There's oftentimes either a monarch or a president that's the head of state, but in a parliamentary system, that president or that monarch, they only serve a ceremonial purpose, kissing babies, cutting ribbons at grand ceremonies. Great Britain is an example with Queen Elizabeth. She doesn't really have any power in the day-to-day governing of Great Britain, but she still is the monarch, and she cuts ribbons and, kisses babies and shakes hands and visits the troops, where the real leader of the government is David Cameron, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, who is right here. A presidential system is definitely a republican form of government. We, citizens in a presidential democracy, elect their representatives to do the governing. They also, and this is where a presidential system is different from a parliamentary system, the people directly elect the chief executive, the head of government, who is known as the president. The United States has a presidential democracy. However, most of the world's republican governments are actually parliamentary systems. Presidential systems are not as common as the parliamentary system. All right, and now for one more layer of what I told you was kind of a complex topic, and this is now, whereas the presidential and parliamentary structures were pretty much strictly limited to democracies because they involve people electing representatives, whether or not they elect all of their representatives and their executive or just their representatives. This next systems that I'm going to discuss with you are how governments decide to share power and really the responsibilities of governing. One of those systems is the unitary system. And a unitary system, Great Britain is a unitary system, and that is one in which the central government has the power. This government, the central government, can, and in Great Britain's case, we're talking about the government in London, they can definitely create other governing bodies, local governments. They can give local councils power, but in the end, that central government is the locus of power for that system. Another system of distributing power and responsibilities is the confederacy. And this is part of our history as Americans. In the same way that this busted out laundromat in the picture here is part of the former owner's history. Both the United States and the guy who opened this laundromat gave it a shot, realized it did not work, and they ditched the bad idea, whether in this case it's the laundromat, or in our history as Americans, it's the idea of the confederacy. And I use this example because there are no confederate governments in the world right now, because it does not work, right? It does not work. Because of how the government is structured, that it forms these weak bonds between independent states. The weakness of those bonds between them eventually results in the demise of the Confederation. It can't maintain itself while still maintaining the independence of its members. The last thing we're going to talk about is the federal system. And the federal system is definitely important to us in America because it is the American system of government, all right? And it is a system that fixes the problems that the confederacy faces by reversing that power structure. It's kind of like you have a strong central government here, and then you have other states that then are kind of on the outskirts here, where they have their areas of independence here, but they also have a reliance on the central government. The sharing of power and the supremacy of the central government are issues that Americans are still trying to work out. But the basic idea is your strong central government that then has the weaker states that have individual powers, but in the long run are subordinate to the strong central government. And that's really it. Thanks, and I hope you have a great day.